Praise be to God in all things. Patrick Coffin rejoins the program. It's been a long time since we had Patrick on. In fact, the last time we had him on, he got us some copyright strikes across several of our YouTube channels. So thanks for that, Patrick. You're a very nice guy.
You're welcome. I just ordered my unclean bell with the sign on your neck.
You are
Yes.
You are required to ring it in the presence of YouTubers, though, I guess.
Yes, especially the decision makers that violate their own policies. But hey, it's a private company, so you can do anything you want.
Yeah, I know,
But,
right?
Being canceled by YouTube is a badge of honor. No problem.
Yeah, praise be to God. PatrickCoffin.media is his website. Check him out if you haven't done so already. Incredible content, a wonderful community there on the inside, and you'll find all of those details at PatrickCoffin.media. Let's start with censorship, if that's okay. You got deplatformed. You're an excellent example of that. And you weren't even doing something on the platform to earn that. It was something happening off the platform. And we're seeing the rise of censorship, deplatforming, and managing what gets said, how it gets said, and who gets to say it in the world today. And that is very frightening. What say you, Patrick Coffin?
I say that the people who run these private big tech companies are afraid of adults having conversations. They want to stop the free flow of information, which is completely against the whole point of a little thing called the First Amendment. First Amendment, freedom of speech, freedom of press. It doesn't mean freedom of accuracy. Obviously, I can start bloviating about all kinds of nonsense, which means no one's going to listen to me. It sorts itself out. My permanent ban from YouTube did not come from me violating their terms of service. I signed on the line, which is dotted, to quote Glenn Ross. And so I own any mistake or any line crossing. And I've had a couple of warnings throughout the years from YouTube. And I always knew where the line was, and I always respected it. If I want to stay on it, I have to abide by their rules. But when we launched the Truth Over Fear Summit, our second one in the first week of May this year, just the existence on the internet of the website restoretheculture.com, and you can find out the amazing 40 speakers that we collected for this summit, the largest of its kind in the world and the most banned. Just launching restoretheculture.com, that within an hour we got an email from YouTube saying you are out of here, even though it's violating their own terms of service. But you kind of have to pick the location of your battle and how much bandwidth you want to use. I made the decision to just leave it there. My show's available in other platforms. And I don't want to keep battling my enemies. I don't want to keep participating in this game of, I call it the Bugs Bunny sheepdog. Remember there was an episode of Bugs Bunny where the sheepdog and Wile E. Coyote, every day they punch their time clock in, and one guy's job is to kill them, and the other guy's job is to protect them, and they're kind of this little dance of agreement of what's really going on. And I don't want out. I want out. So I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything wrong, and I didn't do anything to fight it. I just figured fine. I wonder why more Catholics aren't being deplatformed, frankly.
Well, because they avoid the difficult topics, I imagine. But we here at the Catholic Drive Time, we have one foot in both worlds. We have a foot in the radio world, and we have a foot in the digital space. But we're leaning heavily on the radio side still. We haven't really made that shift in weight yet. And my point to bringing that up is, well, part of me is really sad that the radio industry is declining the way it is. That's because, one, I loved it. I grew up with radio as something that I always felt was magical and special, and it's been an honor to work professionally in that. But more importantly, we've been able to talk about the issues in a way that can't be done in the digital world, at least not without heavy censorship and problems. To see radio and terrestrial communications decline and begin to go away, and then be pushed into an all-digital world where the people who own all of the keys aren't people on our side of the equation. That is really troubling, I think, and I think Catholics ought to be paying attention to that.
It's a double-edged sword. The digital revolution, thanks to the invention of the modem, has provided incredible access to anyone who wants to buy a microphone and get a half-decent light. That's the upside. The downside is everyone can do that, which means you've got a whole flood tide of content to pick and choose from. I'm very heartened at the rise of Gab and Rumble and Odyssey and BitChute and Brighteon. These are all platforms that have the same basic technology, but without the top-heavy censorship spirit. So I'm on Gab, I'm on Rumble, and I think you're going to see even more alternative means of getting information out that avoid the gatekeepers. And I agree with you about radio. Radio is the invention that had the most effect on humanity as far as communication go. Most people say, well, the invention of the TV, the invention of the internet. No, radio is the king. Everything else is a subset of the wireless radio. And when Marconi, for the first time when he was 16 years old, made a signal from one part of his foyer in his house to another without any wires, that was Promethean fire. Because for the first time in human history, and the technology in the early 30s jumped by leaps and bounds every year. There was a new record broken. For the first time in history, place didn't matter.
Yeah.
So in St. Paul's Day, you had to be within earshot of St. Paul. You couldn't hear him. So the show we're doing right now probably reaches more people than St. Paul's entire career.
Ouch.
Because so now we're able to do what Jesus said the church would do in Matthew 28, to teach all nations. All nations now have access to the conversation we're having and that people are listening to, thanks to the wireless radio.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, and it kind of reminds me of the situation in Rome of whenever when the radio was invented and television was invented, they were able to give blessings through the radio, and that was kind of mind-blowing. It still is kind of mind-blowing to see that you can like transfer blessings via radio waves across the world, and that situation uniting Catholics in that way it's quite remarkable. But onto the same topic, you talked about how the free exchange of ideas that needs to happen, and the kind of the good ideas and the bad ideas will kind of battle it out. At the same time, what do you think of the Catholic idea, or the idea in Catholic nations, even though I know we're in the United States, we're not a Catholic nation, but in Catholic nations that censorship is not necessarily a bad thing? I mean, we in America used to censor communism, we used to censor seditious acts, seditious comments, things like that. So how do you respond to the argument that, yes, we have freedom of speech, but your speech is not protected because your speech is hate speech?
This is the nub of it. By the way, Joe, I don't know who that discarnate voice belonged to, but I'm sure it's part of your team.
Yeah, Adrian, yeah.
Just kidding, Adrian. Yeah, Nat Hentoff, the late Jewish atheist writer for The Village Voice, wrote a terrific book called Free Speech for Me, but Not for Thee. Mm-hmm. Every culture, every society, every grouping of human beings is going to have a taboo topic that someone does not want to hear about. The Catholic Church has a rather finessed position on censorship, and it's not an intrinsic evil. We don't have movies glorifying attacks on children. We don't give awards for people who are cowards. You can't say fire in a crowded theater. So free speech is not subject to absolutely no limitations. Every right that we have has some dilution to it. The freedom of my fist stops at your face, right? So then it becomes, what ideas are dangerous, what ideas should be subject to public debate, and which ones should be shut down. I think we can all agree that some worldviews, some messages are worthy of censorship. Mm. And let's have that conversation. What ideas are dangerous? What can incite actual crime? Or encourage something gravely sinful, and what isn't. My favorite example of this is how the Catholic Church, from 1931 until 1966, there was a series of protocols in Hollywood that governed the content of movies and television. It was called the Hays Production Code. It later became known as the Breen Office, after Joseph Breen, who took over from Willie Hayes, who was a Postmaster General. And that effort, in league with the Legion of Decency, is responsible for what we call the best movies ever made, the golden age of theater, from the 30s until of the cinema rather, from 1931 until 1966, when Jack Valenti, a lapsed Catholic, took it all apart through a movie called The Pawnbroker. That's another story for another day. But how it worked wasn't censorship. It was Catholic churches across the country had posted in the vestibule of the church a list of movies that the Legion of Decency had drawn up as being morally offensive. And after Mass, just the way we do today in some parishes where you say the St. Michael prayer, they would pledge, we will not see these movies.
Wow.
They trusted the people who did the heavy lifting of viewing all the crapola. And we're talking, think of how comparatively benign some of the content was that would have made it onto that list. However, that forced Hollywood, because they're businessmen, right? They're not just artists or missionaries. They want to make money. Mm. And so when their customer base threatened to not give them money, that's an ongoing warning to them. Look, you can't have ministers of religion look like idiots. You can't have someone who commits crime get away with it. And so it's not that there was no such thing as an ambiguous ending, because at the same time, while you had the It's a Wonderful Life and the Singing in the Rains, you also had the rise of film noir in the same era. And film noir is very often dark content. There's an ambiguous kind of anti-hero. And I think I'd like to see it come back. I don't know if there's the cultural support for that anymore, but I like the idea of the gatekeeper is actually the customer. It's not the owner of a company like YouTube. It's not someone who's a big tech oligarch trying to control and corral the free flow of ideas. It's the customers saying, we're done. We're not going to do this.
That's true. I love movies, and I know you do as well. And I was thinking of a couple things here. One is the Italian film that was a love letter to movies, to cinema. Can't think of the name at the moment, and it's in it.
I got it. Cinema Paradiso.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly it. And in it has the priest literally cutting out offensive parts of the movie before people are allowed to watch it, and he watches it on his own beforehand, and that's amazing. But in the U.S., it seems like we're in a situation now where the big tech oligarchs, the people who own Hollywood, all these things are so wealthy that they don't care anymore about what we want or not want. They're going to do it anyways, and we're going to buy it anyways. We're still going to get our Disney Plus account. We're still going to get our Netflix, and they're going to use the good movies that people like, the next Marvel movie. They're going to use the money they made for that to make their dream movies about homosexual kittens. I have no idea. But these are the
don't give them, Adrian, don't give them ideas.
What are you talking about? That movie came out last week. You're so behind the times.
It was called Fluffy, The Return.
Right. So, but how do we? So, you have this idea is great, but how do we respond now that nobody cares what we think anymore?
Start making your own movies.
Yeah.
Go to film school.
But the real issue though is making movies is not easy, and obviously the professionals are professionals for a reason. But I think the real hinge in that conversation is not the making of the movie as much as the distribution of the movie. Another area in which they have all of the keys. For instance, so many movie makers are going not into screen, but they're now going straight to digital release and Prime and Netflix and whatnot. And so the days of movie theater releases are almost past us. In fact, I saw there was a film coming out. Is it Matt Damon, maybe? The Last Duel might have been, where they are specifically saying only available in the theaters because they're trying to get people back. And I bring that up to point this out. As Catholics who want to make films, even at the most highest quality possible level, we would struggle to find distribution if our films did not meet the approved narrative. What say you, Patrick Coffin?
I think you're pointing out a real problem, Joe, because you can have the greatest film in the world and you can film it using the best actors and the best food by the caterers. However, there's still one more layer of gatekeeper out there, and that is the distributors. And if they don't like your film, they're going to put up roadblocks, even if it means they're not going to make money. And I think the classic example of that is a guy by the name of Mel Gibson, who wrote a movie with Benedict Fitzgerald called The Passion of the Christ. It's a worldwide phenom. That movie did so much for Christian audiences. First of all, it exposed that they exist and that they want faith-based content. And it was also a lesson for people who are trying to break in. Mel Gibson, A-list guy with like 30 years of experience, I came up against one brick wall after another with this film, and it was all on distribution. So we had to hire a really small one, kind of an outsider fighting group called Newmarket, and they brought it into the market, and the audience chased after that movie. They didn't have to go and chase after it. That was the first time where a movie like this, through grassroots marketing, it's the cinematic version of the incident in Field of Dreams. They built it, and the audience came. So then it becomes, can Christians or liberals who with brains or conservatives who love films, can they build their own distribution center? Can they replicate what they're trying to do at PureFlix? Now, I happen to not like explicitly Christian films. I'm glad they exist. I hope they make $1 billion, but I don't think they move the needle outside that church viewing sphere. You know.
Have you seen VidAngel? Are you familiar with VidAngel?
I'm very familiar with VidAngel, and it's absolutely brilliant. Do you want to just explain what VidAngel is? So,
in fact, we interviewed the CEO of VidAngel not all that long ago. It's a product that my family has been using now for years. It originally started to filter movies that we could rent in those days back on the Google Play Store. But they were sued by Disney and a couple of others, and they lost, and they had to pay a bunch of money, and they went through a sort of a restructuring. And now you can filter some films and TV shows off of Netflix or Prime or some others. We still use the product, but what's interesting to me, one of the latest additions to their sort of their menu offering is they want to support small movie makers, small filmmakers, and so they give you an opportunity. It's kind of like what Uber is to rideshare. VidAngel might be to small filmmakers who are trying to not only make their films but find distribution as well. So there might be an opportunity there. But what gets me as a Catholic, see, VidAngel's Mormon, right? It's funded by Mormons. It's run by Mormons. We still use the product in my house. However, like all of these Catholics in the world who have great financial resources, and yet they've never come together and they've never built a data center that provides an opportunity for Catholics to ensure we have a future with digital product hosting or delivery, email services, text services, website services, so that when the gatekeepers of the internet say, no, you're not allowed here anymore, they ensure that the Catholic organizations can continue to operate. That just does not exist. But look at the Mormons. They're getting behind it. They make it happen. Why can't we do that?
That is a great rhetorical question. I admire what they've done. Here's the one difference between Mormons and Catholics is that Mormons support each other. Mormons are like blonde, blue-eyed Jews in that way. There's a book called An Empire of Their Own by Neil Gabler, a Jewish writer. He's a former pundit on Fox News, and the subtitle is How the Jews Invented Hollywood. And they have a sense of being a beleaguered minority. Catholics in Hollywood really don't do that. It's a strange thing. Every Catholic I know in the industry they roll their eyes. How Catholics are slow to reach out and join arms with fellow Catholics to build something. But the VidAngel idea is really something else, where you mentioned their first lawsuit that they lost because the artists really need that many F-bombs and that many sex scenes for it to be just so perfect, right?
Yeah.
So they bought the rights to the film. So you buy, as I understand how it works, you buy the film and then you sell it back to them, and it works out to be the
that was the original version, but that no longer
works that new one? How can you filter out F-bombs and
and it's all, so it used to be exactly as you state. I would rent a film from Google or Apple, and now because I rented it, I have some control over that process legally, and therefore I could filter. Well, they got sued. That's now no longer the case. The way it works now is I connect my VidAngel account to my Netflix or my Prime account or HBO, those kinds of things, those subscription accounts. So I connect these in the app, and then whatever is legally allowed and available in their menu of films, I can then filter and watch filtered. So not everything can be filtered. Only it's like no Disney products can be on there. There's a couple of other big studios that also sued them, but there's still quite a bit of content that is available to be filtered. I don't have a Netflix subscription. I canceled them, but I do honestly have a Prime account still. So we watch.
Bezos get to space.
Yeah, for instance, we watched not Chris Hemsworth, but who is the
Chris Evans.
Chris Evans. We watched his latest film, The Tomorrow War. I watched it on Filter. I love that opportunity. Yeah, I cut out the fat, cut out cursing, blasphemy, sex, some violence or whatever, and just watch the plot. I love that. That's amazing. There's films that become available to my children that were not otherwise available because of this excessive stuff. It's a great concept, but I think also, and more importantly, the ability to help and support small content creators and filmmakers create something special and then find distribution in addition to funding. Like, we ought to be, as a community, providing for that opportunity. But as you state, we don't really work well with each other. We don't, this is my egg, stay away, you do your thing, I do my thing. And because we are divided that way, we will never, in my opinion, find the kind of distribution necessary to create successful economy that will provide for the kinds of films that will entertain and inspire or what have you.
Yep, 105%.
Let's switch a little bit to talking somewhat parallel to this or related to this in regards to censorship, and that is spying, blackmail, and the use of our personal data. We saw out of the Pillar this last week and a half some major stories drop that are rocking the Catholic world right now. Monsignor Burrell out of the USCCB stepped down because it was discovered and verified through the Pillar investigation that his phone was used on the Grindr hookup app. And they further released in the same investigation that there were, I think it was as much as 16 phones inside the Vatican, not in public spaces, but in the offices and buildings that none of the public can get to. Those phones were being used on hookup apps to include Grindr and others. And it illustrated in the report that these apps, in the terms of service, clearly state that your data is not going to be held private, or it could be used to sell it to third parties, or in fact, in the case of Grindr being owned by China up until last year, given to the spy agencies in China. I mean, it's a major source of a blackmail opportunity, spying opportunity, just at the surface level, let alone the scandal caused by all of these people. What do you say about all that?
I just did somewhat of a deep dive in the Coffin report inside coffinnation.com on this very, very question. Not only the means that were used to expose these double life homosexual clergy, but also the reaction among the Catholic media sphere to that activity. The bishop of Monsignor Burrell is William Callahan, he was ordained in the Diocese of La Crosse, Wisconsin. And the day that it broke, he wrote a letter to his priests, which I obtained and then talk about, in which he cast some doubt on whether or not, quote, our brother Jeff even did anything immoral.
Wow.
As though, oh, he's on Grindr, but they just met to play Scrabble. It was a misunderstanding. Whoops, yeah. I downloaded a gay troll app, except that he did it daily for years. As the great Thomas Aquinas said, sin makes you stupid. Mm-hmm. If you sign up for something and you have to sign, again, on the line which is dotted, where your data is not private, it's not in a Fort Knox privacy bubble, then you have to dance with who brung you. And if it's immoral to expose people who are committing at least canonical crimes, we don't know if there are minors involved. That's another thing that kind of rubbed me the wrong way. Yeah. Archbishop Jose Gomez, in his statement, said that, well, doesn't involve minors. How does he know? And people even who are out of the gay lifestyle, they say the sex trafficking happens on Grindr and Tinder. Minors pretend to be older than they are. Yeah. This is a common thing. The bishop's own John Jay report found that between 1950 and now, 81% of what we call sex abuse cases are homosexual predators with teen boys. Yeah. We don't know if minors were involved. I pray not, but you can't categorically say at the outset that that's not going on.
99% of McCarrick's victims were not minors. They were seminarians. They were young men. Right. He got busted on the minor, but that was a very, very, very small percentage of his victims. The vast majority were adult male. But there's the rub, isn't it? So long as they're not minors, well, then what are we talking about here, right? It's adult consensual. How bad could this be? Like, where is the outrage just that alone? Like, it is not okay that clergy members are hooking up on Grindr with adults. It would be worse if they were minors, but it's still not okay. But there seems to be some sort of a quiet, acceptance of this, a normalization.
You play poker, Joe or Adrian?
No,
not too much. Texas Hold'em.
Okay. You play Texas Hold'em, so you know what a tell is.
Yes, sir.
The statement, well, minors weren't involved, is a tell. And what it tells me is a higher proportion than Catholics want to admit of our bishops are homosexual. And their concern is not with sodomy. It's not with sin, scandal, lives ruined. It's with the law. Well, they weren't minors. They had this, the age was not catastrophic.
Yes.
I don't know how else to interpret a comment like that, because it's designed to minimize and deflect.
Yeah. There's a number of things we can go from there. And one thing I was thinking of, or two things I was thinking of. One is I've been reading the Book of Gomorrah recently by St. Peter Damian, and it's quite. Where is the Peter Damians today? Where is the bishops that are standing up? There are plenty of bishops saying things about a lot of different subjects, but the real issue here is the sodomy. Yes, the Latin Mass is incredibly important. I attend Latin Mass every Sunday, and I think it's incredibly important. But in reality, the biggest issue today is the sodomy that's happening among the hierarchy, and it was happening in Peter Damian's day too. And so I guess the two questions that I have is, how is this the biggest issue? What is the biggest issue now? And the second question being, among Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, there is huge backlash against the pillar and said this is a sin of detraction. He was already punished. We should not have revealed this. Where is the line for reporters and commentators on talking about these kind of things?
I think as long as you're not sinning yourself or doing something illegal, if you're trying to get to the truth of someone's corruption, and remember, Monsignor Burrell was not a priest out in Bohunk, northern Indiana. He was a formator at the National North American College. He had oversight over young, vulnerable, often naive seminarians under his care. This is the guy that is allowed to rise so high, the highest ranking cleric who's not a bishop in the United States, which raises the question, what did he get that far in spite of his gay proclivities, or was it an open secret that he's one of us and therefore we're going to promote him? Because he comes from the mold of don't ask, don't tell. This week I interviewed an attorney named Raymond Belair. Raymond is representing former seminarian from New York Archdiocese, Anthony Gorja, who was removed from the NAC 2 years back for being heterosexual and not wanting to be groomed by the gay overlords who run the seminary. $125 million tort, the largest of its kind in the United States. You probably didn't hear about it in Catholic news, but it's a very, very important case because Anthony Gorja is standing up for and kind of representing the hundreds through the years, the thousands of seminarians since the 70s who've been kicked out. It's all told in Michael Rose's book, Goodbye, Good Men. Mm-hmm. And Anthony Gorja is the first one to stand up and say, I'm not going to go along with this anymore. I'm going to fight back. You can't ruin people's lives because they don't want to join the Lavender Mafia. And by the way, Monsignor Burrell has a pretty cushy situation, as at least he did as of last week, with the pastor of Our Lady of Mercy Parish in Potomac, Maryland, in the Archdiocese of Washington, pardon me, allowed him to be this visiting summer presider at the parish. The pastor is Father Charles Antonicelli, who is the longtime escort / assistant / secretary of Uncle Ted McCarrick. Wow. Before that, he was the enabler and defender of Cardinal Wuerl. So nothing changes. It's just, whack-a-mole with these people. There doesn't seem to be any calling to account.
That's part of the problem is most lay folks are, maybe not most, but there's a great number of lay people that are waking up and they're just, they're not rad trads. They're not deep and connected in all of these stories and know all the details. They're just tired of the shenanigans. They just want, they want to know that their priest is madly in love with Christ and with his church and is sold out for the faith, even to the point of martyrdom, possibly. That's really what they want to know. And then otherwise, they're just trying to get on with their lives every day. And it just seems like there's such tone deafness from the hierarchy in general about the how tired we are to the constant scandal, one after another, and it seems never ending. But I want to switch a little bit topics here, keep us on track. We're talking to Patrick Coffin. PatrickCoffin.media is his website, patrickcoffin.media. Let's go back to the data for a second. Again, Grindr was forced to sell, but it was owned by a Chinese company. And according to Chinese law, all of their data, app companies, web companies, internet companies, are required to share their data back with the Chinese intelligence. So you've got all these phones at the Vatican active on Grindr, as well as a couple of other apps. One was owned by a Russian company, if I'm not mistaken. How much of a risk was there? Is this at all related to the China's Vatican, the Vatican deal that they made with China that allowed the Communist Party to have a role in picking bishops? I mean, do you see a connection in all that?
I feel like writing a book called "You Think."
Duh. Yeah.
Yeah. That the vulnerability to blackmail is a key driver in disastrous concordance, as was signed with the Vatican and the CCP back in 2018. There's no question that if you have high-ranking prelates who are seeking anonymous gay sex and they're vulnerable to blackmail, they're going to be very, very manipulable at the bargaining table. And they don't want to have their cushy Roman apartment lifestyle threatened. They want access to the gay orgies in the CDF offices. I mean, I'm losing my lunch just talking about this. I can't believe we're at this point. But certainly that kind of CCP infiltration is very useful for the communists who see the biggest threat to communism is not little Patrick Coffin or some conservative writer here and there. It's the Catholic Church, because communism is a fake version of Catholicism. It twists what sounds like Christian ideals, like you see this in the first couple of chapters of the Acts of the Apostles, where the apostles shared everything in common. Oh, look, communists say, this is like Marx. To each according to his ability, from each according to his need. See, we're just like you. Let's extend the hand and join with you, Catholics, to fight oppressive structures, blah, blah, blah. So the big stick in the mud against the movement to worldwide communist domination is the Catholic Church. We're the only institution, we're the oldest, we're the strongest, and we have the most articulate objections to what's wrong with communism from every possible angle. Until the papacy of Pope Francis. And then that resolve began to buckle, and people with communistic sympathies began to be promoted. And the clarity that Catholics have come to expect for generations on the question of communism began to diminish. And actually I don't want to blame Pope Francis too much here, because it actually started in the early 60s with the decision of the Council Fathers to not condemn communism. There's not a line of condemnation of communism in the Vatican Second Vatican Council documents. There's a footnote in, I believe, Gaudium et Spes, but there were schemas presented to the Church Fathers, and it's not that they were edited and kind of watered down. They were not even considered, which is counterintuitive, to say the least, since there were cardinals, priests, bishops, and Catholic laymen in communist prisons in the 60s, suffering for Christ in the faith. So that ambiguity that got weaponized is becoming more in the on the front burner under Francis. But that was a long-winded way of saying, I think yes, the notion of a honeypot is not just sexy Russian spies.
Well, we all remember the story of John Paul II, Karol Wojtyła's confessional being bugged by the KGB. I mean, I find it fascinating. Even in George Weigel, in his book *The End in the Beginning*, even he admits that the church, the JP2, knew that he had cardinals and archbishops on the take of the KGB, working in his own curia. He knew this existed. He didn't seem to be interested in putting a stop to it. But it takes me back to why Our Lady in 1917 warned us about the spread of the errors out of Russia and the spread of communism. And there's this saying, so goes the church, so goes the world. Right now, Cuba, we got people in Cuba rallying and calling for freedom. They want an end to communism in their country. We have an administration who is letting tens of thousands of migrants to come across the border in the south, some of which are from South America, Mexico, but a lot of people also coming from Africa through that gate. They're welcome to come into our country. They're not stopped. I mean, it's a mess. And yet today there's a report he sent 27 Cubans back to Cuba because he won't let them in. So help us understand here. Why does it seem? I mean, you have congressmen who are openly embracing socialism and communist ideas. You've got Antifa and BLM going crazy across our country. Why has the world drunk from the communist Kool-Aid yet again?
Where to start, Joe? That's a perceptive question. It does not compute unless you accept that there are actual card-carrying communists in the American government and have been for years. It's hard to understand why some refugees are not created as equal as others. Every Cuban I've ever met has been an American-loving patriot. They want to integrate. They want to speak as perfect English as they can. They want to learn the DNA, the documents of our country. They know what it's like to live under the boot of Castro. That they would be turned away, but all manner of other kinds of illegal immigrants are allowed to storm across the border. Tells you everything you need to know. That the people who make the decisions at the highest levels of the U.S. government are sympathetic to communism. They don't want communist fighters here because they're not going to vote Democrat.
Yes, talking about the kind of staying on the topic of communism but moving back to the Vatican, the idea of communism spreading its errors again today, and even though it seemed like everybody thought that it was crushed and it was going away, and it brings its ugly head back up, it reminds me of Thomas Aquinas. You said it at the beginning, sin makes you stupid, but it's the same way. It's the idea is sin makes you a heretic, and heresy makes you sinful. And Cornelius Lapide, when we were reading, we do the commentaries in the morning, I was reading Cornelius Lapide, and he says that if we want to convert someone, you have to get them to stop sinning. And that's why I was saying at the beginning earlier, that sodomy is one of the biggest issues today, because sodomy is one of the sins that cry out to heaven for vengeance, and it causes us to abandon our faith. And so whenever we have so many sodomites in the clergy and in the hierarchy, what does this do? But it makes them heretics. It doesn't, it's nothing about that in particular, but whenever you do that, when you do sin, your will is weakened and your intellect is darkened, and you're not able to compute. You're not able to do that. Yet we see, Our Lady of Fatima and her message today. How is Our Lady of Fatima's message today relevant, Patrick, for the people today in battling against communism that we thought was going away?
I like the way you framed it, Adrian, because the Catholics we're prone to, because we hear things a lot, like the Creed, like the Our Father, like the canon of the Mass. We hear these phrases and they roll past us like a familiar train. We don't really pay attention to the words. Russia will spread her errors. Well, what errors? Is it just political? Or could the error be the seeds of the failed sexual revolution? I think those are the other errors that Russia spread. The Bolsheviks that murdered the Tsar and instituted the tyranny called communism, they were also libertines. They had no sexual mores whatsoever. Abortion, no problem. Adultery, no problem. Free, open love, polygamy, whatever. So that, I think that entrenchment of sexual sin is another parasite on communism. And I think that's the error that Russia spread as well. And we can say, well, more openly, it manifested in the political sphere or the political order in China and North Korea and Venezuela and Cuba. But in America, the errors of Russia are relativism, are the homo heresy. We don't even have to argue. It's not even argued for. It's presumed. How do you account for the fact that a Father James Altman or an Archbishop Vigano, who to me is the closest analog to St. Peter Damian, with this trumpet blast of clarity, they're sidelined, they're shunted, they're fired, they're stripped of their faculties. But but an open salesman of the LGBT sodomy lifestyle, Father James Martin, gets a love letter from Pope Francis, handwritten.
Yeah.
There's another tell of the priorities of the church today. And it's heartbreaking, but it's not just sorrowful heartbreaking. It makes you angry. And I think that anger can be turned by the grace of God into more fervent prayer for conversion, starting with us. You know, we want to convert Russia, yes, but I want to convert the guy in the mirror first.
Yeah, for sure. There's a couple of other stories I want to get to in our conversation with Patrick Coffin. PatrickCoffin.media and is his website where he has his podcast, The Patrick Coffin Show, and his insider community. I encourage you to check that out, PatrickCoffin.media.
I really like the book, Controlling Words, Controlling Minds, Speechless by Michael Knowles. I was reading it, and the use of language, it's brilliant among the left and among our bishops and our clergy. We were seeing stories of, they're saying a huge spike in coronavirus deaths, up 40%, and then they realized that the numbers was going from 2 to 3. And they're saying up 40%, and they just don't tell you the actual number of people who are dying, and up 100%, 1 to 2. And you're just, it's mind blowing the way they manipulate language. Patrick Coffin, what do you think of this? This has been with us since Thomas Jefferson wrote about the press, and he decried the press. I mean, this is the guy, he's one of the main architects, and he was always concerned about accuracy. And I think it's Jefferson who said, you're more likely to get along better in the world if you don't read any newspapers, because your mind is not marinated in BS. Is it okay? Is it? I meant Billy Shepherd by BS.
Sure.
Yeah. So Cecil Rhodes, another oligarchic guy, the guy who after whom we have the Rhodes Scholarship. He was a proponent of leadership through journalism. By journalism, he meant propaganda. The nephew of Sigmund Freud, Eddie Bernays, is called the father of PR. He wrote a book in 1928 called Propaganda. We're subject to propaganda. We want to belong to the crowd. We want to join fads. Remember the ice bucket challenge a couple years ago? Yeah. Where millions of people threw ice cold water in their heads. Half of them didn't even know why they were doing it. But we're going to be on YouTube. It didn't move the needle. It didn't cure anything.
Right.
There's a lot of psychological studies that have to do with people not wanting to go against the crowd, even if the crowd's only 2 or 3 people. We naturally want to fit in. This is the insight of the great René Girard. The people want things, but they also want what people want, and they'll reject what people reject. So certain people are certified as pariahs, and you can't talk about those ideas, and you can't associate with those people. And it's like an idea contagion. You see this at work in office gossip, and you see its culmination in the crucifixion of Christ our Lord, where gossip about him became all of us against you. We have to, burn the witch. We have to expel the evildoer. We have to have a scapegoat. It's a very powerful dynamic. And the people who run this world through media know it. They know that people are frightened. Why does the Bible continually say, be not afraid? Why is that the first 3 words that John Paul II said in October 1978? Be not afraid. The answer is because we're prone to it. That's why we need to hear the antidote so often.
But there's so many implications here. For instance, the vaccine issue in particular with segregation. We're seeing it in the church, as we just talked about. We're seeing it in society. For instance, the conversation around secession has taken a spike in recent years, especially this past couple of years, 2020, now 2021. It's been around for a long time. For instance, there's a movement in Texas that's been after this for many years now. They've gained a little bit more steam, though. Fascinating enough, you've got counties in Oregon that are begging to secede and go over to Idaho. You got counties in California that would love to leave. Unfortunately, too many Californians are coming to Texas these days. I'd like to put a border up on New Mexico side just to prevent some of that. But either way, the conversation around secession is now becoming more and more commonplace. That, I think, ought to give us pause and concern. Imagine a scenario in which the federal federal government decides to cram down the getting rid of the Second Amendment, tends to cram down the censorship on a whole nother level. Everybody has to be vaccinated, masking, the kit and the caboodle. We're forced to take every immigrant that comes across the border, whether we want to or not, or what have you. I see that as a major push towards things like secession. And in a world where states begin to break off and break up, I don't see that as a good thing. I see that as ultimately having very bad downsides that would outweigh the good upsides. What say you, Patrick Coffin?
Well, I think a state is becoming a mini nation now in the divided America of today. The state identity is almost like a miniature nation. You have a different culture altogether. It's certainly true in California, Northern California, Fresno, Modesto, a lot of blue dog Democrats and hardcore red conservatives live there, but they're in pockets. You can't have a secession where the people of like minds are in these pockets. It's not going to work. You have to have a landmass. It works better with the Oregon and Idaho example that you gave, and in the Texas one. You're just pointing out the classic tension between federalism and statism. What's the limit of states' rights? America itself began with the illegal act of rising up against the English through war and bloodshed, guns and bullets. I grew up in Canada. I just became a U.S. citizen 2 months ago, and Canada became Canada when Pierre Elliott Trudeau had sat down with Queen Elizabeth II in 1982 for tea. That's Canadian independence. There was no shots fired. It was just, pass the sugar. Yeah, it's extraordinary. So we have a very different attitude about what the cultural war looks like.
Wow. Yeah. Amazing.
So, I don't know. People they're going to vote with their money, and they're going to vote with their feet. And sometimes they're going to vote with what kind of cultural makeup do they want their country? I do understand Californians who want to leave. I also have some sympathy for parents who want to stay and fight. They want to see that their legacy is protected. Why should they leave California? They've been here for 4 or 5 generations. So I wish there was an easy answer, because I see the merits of both sides. And a lot of people, since human nature is lazy by definition, a lot of people who leave California, they just realize, look, I can't go up against this juggernaut. It's Pelosi land. It's her nephew. Most people don't know that the nephew of Nancy Pelosi is Gavin Newsom.
I know that. What?
They're related?
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Well, it's an open secret, my friend.
I mean, but if it's as good, if life in the rest of California is as good as San Francisco, then I don't know what you're complaining about.
Right, exactly. If human feces on the sidewalk doesn't make you excited to move there, I don't know what will. And they use Nancy and Gavin have the same hair product distributor too. So, but a lot of parents, they want their kids to have a chance. And if they think that Texas or Tennessee or any of the Carolinas is going to give that, I do sympathize with wanting to go there. I don't know if it's the tipping point for actual secession now, because secession would involve taking up arms. No one's going to let that happen without a fuss, right?
The effort in Texas is more of a Brexit model, and it is designed intentionally to avoid armed conflict. But I think the lasting implications are very serious, and I don't know that most people who have thought about secession have thought it through all that much. And I just think, as Catholics, we ought to be paying attention, very concerned. And it goes back to it reminds me of what Our Lady said in 1917 to those 3 shepherd kids, that the errors of Russia will spread. And here we are. It has spread. The Vatican, the Pope, as you pointed out, the Council Fathers refused to rebuke the Soviet Union, refused to consecrate Russia in the specific way Our Lady asked. They looked for a get-out-of-jail-free card there because, was it JP2 worried about what would happen to his polls? I don't know. But my point is, society has slipped so far that there's this constant tension now that we're sitting on a tinderbox. And if things go up, it will be China that will win the day. And at the end of the day, as Catholics, we still have access to the most potent anti-communist weapon in the arsenal, prayer, fasting, and penance. And where's the call, the universal call for prayer, fasting, and penance to put an end to the communist oppressions around the world?
Yeah. One thing I wanted to, because we've been talking about the news. We're talking about how the average layperson is reacting, and how we one of the things that we can do is pray, fast, and what we don't understand is that a lot of people, your average Catholic, may not know theology, may not know the intricacies of Karl Rahner and de Lubac and all these theologians and von Balthasar, but they have this, what Professor Plinio, the founder of the TFP, called a Catholic sense, or as Jesse Romero says, we have PhDs in common sense, and common sense is not very common. And this idea is of a Catholic sense. This idea of a Catholic sense is the idea that you may know doctrine. And knowing doctrine, for example, you may know that, technically speaking, it's not wrong for a priest to get married. Technically speaking, and doctrinally, you know that, priests can technically get married and it's still a valid priesthood and this, that, and the other. But the Catholic sense understands that the priesthood's grandeur demands priestly celibacy. And we kind of lost this Catholic sense. And I think this goes right in what you were saying earlier about it's better for average person to not be embroiled in the daily newspaper.
Yeah, I agree, Adrian. There is that sensus fidelium. Hosting Catholic Answers Live for 7.5 years, I saw it time and again where a lady or a gentleman will have a question about something they heard at Mass. The father said something, or the bishop issued some kind of directive, and they couldn't quite articulate it. They don't have PhDs in theology, as you say, but there was some gut level, visceral, this is wrong. And that's the sense of that's what you get at baptism. You don't have to have articulate powers and write a book in Greek about it. Because the Lord protects his own. The Lord wants to keep people close to him more than we want our loved ones close to him. So I think it's a magnificent instrument of grace that kind of PhD in common sense, as Jesse would say, it is there. It's implanted in us. It's supernatural in origin. It's supra-rational. It's not irrational, but it transcends reason. And I think it's like our consciences themselves. It's put there for reasons to protect us. And I'm not saying it's sufficient. I mean, you should. The more theology you know, the more there is to love about God. It's the terrific takeaway of Frank Sheed's great book, Theology and Sanity. But it's enough. I love that concept of enough. It suffices. God's grace doesn't pummel us. The proofs for God they're not going to rub your face in it. So it's like self-evident, but it is enough. The Lord hides himself a little bit. He wants us to knock. He wants us to seek. And then when we find him, we realize that we've been cooperating in grace. We haven't been compelled by anything or anybody. That answers your question in what way, Adrian?
It's good enough for me. That it sounded great. I love the talking points.
Well, okay.
So it sufficed.
It was sufficient.
Last question, and a way to put a bow on all of this in our conversation with Patrick Coffin. Is it as bad as we feel, or is there hope?
That's not a good sign.
All right. Well, we broke.
Thanks
Patrick
a lot, guys.
Coffin.
Thank you so much for joining me.
He doesn't want to commit to hope. You got to.
I don't. I think the answer is yes.
Yes, it's as bad as we feel, or yes, there's hope.
Both.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, I think it might be worse. We don't know what God in his all-loving providence is going to permit us to happen. We do know from sacred scripture that he is going to return. We say this in the Mass, right? Christ has died, Christ is risen, Christ will come again. His return is going to be preceded by a number of signs. You can read them in Matthew 24, the first and second Thessalonians. I think the fact that the Catholic Church is participating in this oligarchic insanity about the masks, the lockdowns, the presumption that it's all for others, it's you protecting other people's help. I think that is a remote dress rehearsal for the rise of the Antichrist. I'm not saying Pope Francis is the Antichrist. I'm not saying anything like that. I am saying that when the man of sin arrives, the man of perdition, or the Antichrist, he's going to be extremely effective in deceiving us. Remember, it's not the anti-devil, it's the Antichrist. And when people who are robed with the brand or the reputation of truth and clarity are saying things that are not true and are not clear, you know the work of the Antichrist is in play. Again, I'm not saying anybody's possessed, nothing like that. I am saying that the structures that Catholics used to rely on from time immemorial have been somewhat withdrawn. We can't look to the magisterium anymore. My good friend Ken Hensley and I, Ken now works with Marcus Grodi and the Coming Home Network. He's a former Baptist minister, and we've had long conversations about how much more of a challenge it is to evangelize as Catholics who love Jesus Christ and want him loved. And it's like Ken came up with this analogy. I hope this doesn't get him in trouble. We're now like door-to-door salesmen of vacuum, this vacuum product. And when you go ding dong, hi, I'm a Catholic, and let me show you our stuff here. And you turn the machine on, and then the room fills up with smoke, and you're coughing. You can't even see the guy you're trying to sell to. Yes, the unit's really expensive. You want to buy? Come on. Right?
Yes, so, exactly. Yeah, that kind of summarizes that pretty good.
However, Logos is always rising. Our Lord Jesus Christ gives us enough, and I'm continually stunned when I to take two examples. Gavin Ashenden was on my show a couple years ago. Gavin is probably the highest profile convert to the Catholic Church in many years. He was the former chaplain to Queen Elizabeth II, like super high ranking Anglican prelate. And I mean, unaccountably, he's a very smart man. He's a historian by training. He knew he had to become Catholic in spite of all the craziness. He just figured, well, Christ made promises. If the church is not divinely founded, then it would have folded, 2 weeks after the resurrection. So that's Gavin Ashenden, great guy, and speaks very well since the British invented the language. Another one is, I believe his name is Tom Breen. I think I'm getting that right. He was an Associated Press writer who covered the Boston sex abuse scandal, the whole spotlight story of 2002. And he was a lapsed Catholic. Covering that sex scandal in Boston brought him back to the church.
That's amazing.
How do you explain that except for grace?
Yeah. Yeah. Amen.
So, well put. The Lord's, if I can use a radio analogy, the Lord, especially through the Holy Spirit, is always on the air. So the question is, are we going to tune in?
Yeah, amen to that. And we'll leave it there. Patrick Coffin has been our guest. Great conversation, covering a lot of ground today. PatrickCoffin.media is his website. Check it out. You can find his podcast, his insider community there, and a lot more. PatrickCoffin.media. Patrick, thanks for being on with us today.
Adrian, Giuseppe, it's a pleasure. Anytime.
God love you.
God bless.